Hi, everybody. I am Sarah Beth Berg, and I am so thrilled to have you here watching today. I've got an amazing guest who I'll bring up in a moment, Dana Ray. And today's topic is all around how do you name yourself? We live in this crazy world where job titles matter. How you walk into the world and introduce yourself says something about you. People make assumptions and judgments, and they categorize and stereotype and box you in just by the identity labels you use, and especially in our work. So, if you haven't familiarized yourself with me and what I do, I consider myself a professional identity researcher. I've been studying for almost a decade. How are you more than your job title, which is also the name of my book? Because we use job titles as sort of just a simple way to make sense of ourselves. Are you a director of sales or a head of, product development or the CEO and co-founder of an amazing startup? But what does that really mean about you? Those are just kind of placeholders. And I've been learning more and more that people's professional identities are not even realized to themselves. When I ask people, who are you beside your job title? A lot of people don't know how to answer that question. And yet, when you know who you are, you can make sense of yourself. And then you can clarify your why and communicate what you really do because you know you. So I believe all of this professional work we're trying to do in career development comes back to professional identity. And that leads me to our guest today, Dana, because she is the namer of the unnamed thing. She helps people unbox themselves. Like, I already love the language she uses about herself. I've never met somebody like her. She's very unique in what she does because she's not just a branding specialist or a personal branding expert. She literally focuses on language strategy around who we are, which is why her work and my work is such an amazing pair. So without delaying further, I'm going to bring her up and we're going to jump in. Dana,
Huh?
welcome.
Thank you. I love that introduction. Yeah, and no one could see me, but as you were describing the challenges of like understanding ourselves and communicating ourselves, I was like, yeah.
We're gonna groove into this really juicy topic because you and I are nerds on this.
We
And when we
are.
did our pre-call, we just couldn't shut up. We have so much to say.
And we
So
go like deep into the theory and the structure. Yeah, there's a lot of synchronicity in our work.
so we have a lot of things to cover, and we'll probably have to bring you back because we'll see how far we get today. But let's start with a foundation. I want to kind of ground people because we're already using a lot of language. People might be like, what are they talking about? Job
hmm
titles and unboxing. So let's just define what is professional identity. And yeah, that's sort of the starting point. So, from my background, and then I'd love to hear where you are. I see professional identity as what you call yourself in your work, whether or not you're getting paid. It could be volunteer work or you could be a mentor of some capacity, but it's the name you give yourself that is not your job title. So that's my definition of professional identity. How do you think about identity in work?
I love that definition. I think about it as there is internal language that we use with ourselves that makes sense to ourselves. And when we say it about ourselves, it's the thing that connects us to the thing that where we're most alive. And then
Mm.
there's external language. We will translate from that internal self to the external context. So that might be your
Mhm.
job title. That might be I'm in this industry. It's helping other people see and hear you in words that make sense to them and are also accurate to who you are as a creative and as a person who doesn't fit in a neat little box,
Oh my
of which
God.
a title is like, it's a word. It's not supposed to define you.
Oh, so many good gems right there. A title is not supposed to define you. I just want to underscore that. And then I want to come back in a moment to this idea of internal, external, because that tracks a
Yeah.
lot of the theory and research I've done. Let's define one more piece of this puzzle
Yeah.
because personal branding, I think, has gotten a lot of traction. People are a little more familiar.
hmm
And when I started doing my research, even 5 years ago, and I was kind of putting things out on chat boards and in Facebook groups, I said, well, what does professional identity mean to you? And I got a lot of feedback. People thought I meant personal branding, and I didn't. They were already conflating the two.
Yeah.
So it made me step back and go, whoa, wait a second, there's something different. So in my mind, so if professional identity is what you call yourself, and it's, as you kind of mentioned, internal language, then the personal branding aspect is the intentional act of putting your identity into the world. It's how you choose to deliver, convey, create imagery, design your website, write your bio. That is the branding side. But if you don't know who you are, the identity, you can't do the branding work yet. So that's where I'm coming from. Tell me where you are on that.
So this goes in perfectly to how I got into this work, which is
Okay.
that I had been doing a master's in English, literature,
Mm,
and creative writing. And I knew the academic path wasn't for me. I was looking for another way to use language to put food on the table. And I had this great opportunity to jump into a marketing agency. And they did a lot of branding work, and I loved it. I loved the process of going, who is this organization? Who are these leaders? Who is the founder? What is their story? How does that then get communicated? And seeing that come alive in the design, I'm not a designer, but like seeing our
yeah.
teams take that was amazing to me. But the gap that I saw was that so many organizations would come to us and have no conception of how to even talk about themselves internally or define what their work was. And it would leave us scrambling to try to
Yeah.
figure out, where's this external piece going to go? Because if you're only thinking about audience, you're missing the roots part of it. And you need both. You can't just
Mhm.
like develop the roots and not have an expression. Um,
Mm.
but I think about that branding piece as that external piece
Yeah.
of when you have this internal understanding, your feet on the ground, the language around what matters to you, then you can communicate something that's solid and real and robust in
Yes.
a way that other people will find compelling and connect with you around. But they are two different processes. And I found the reason I ended up in my work is that I found I was much more skilled at the internal definition piece
Oh.
than the branding piece. Like, you need marketing, you need social media. I wasn't as good at those. I wasn't as good at helping people figure out those
Mhm.
strategies, but putting language to who they were, what they had to offer, what made them unique, that was the thing that I could help people do.
Oh my gosh. Okay, the roots part, like, I just was getting big visuals on that, and then I wanna go
You're an
more.
artist, so
I
yes.
know. I am. The visual brain, the imagination is big in my mind.
Mhm.
But you knowing the roots first is knowing who you are, and I'm even just sitting in this chair right now, right, thinking, like, I'm grounded, I'm rooted. But the question is like, well, what kind of chair am I sitting on? How would I describe this chair to other people? Is this just a white chair? Is it a comfy chair? Is it an office chair? Like there's just so much detail that the word chair
Yeah.
is not enough. And if I'm telling people, oh, I'm sitting on a chair, they've got different images in their mind of what that means,
Yes,
which
yes,
is
they
the
do.
analogy for us. If I just tell you I'm a researcher, everybody, you just kind of go, okay, she reads and writes and thinks and talks, but on what and
Or
why?
you've known a researcher or you've known a science researcher and you're like, that's different than
Mhm.
what you're up to. Mhm.
Yes. Okay. So
Everyone has their own specific meaning around words. And that's why communication is so hard.
ugh,
So you say chair, I say chair. We both learned the word chair at completely different moments with completely different
yeah,
chairs. We've
yeah.
sat in different chairs in our life. So we have to be it requires both understanding of what we mean by chair, where do we get our concept of chair, and
Mhm.
then the person we're talking to, what are their experiences, and the empathy to try to close that gap between language, even when we speak the same language. Like, heaven
Oh,
forbid we're coming from like different cultures and
yeah,
different languages entirely. But
that's what
yeah.
I was just thinking about the cultural differences. You've probably heard the expression, "A picture is worth 1,000 words, a video is worth 1,000 pictures, and an experience is worth 1,000 videos." Like, language
Okay.
is that complicated is where I'm going with this. That
Yes.
and this is one of the findings that I got in my dissertation research on identity years ago. Words are arbitrary points of meeting, and it comes from a Rene Magritte painting where he painted an image of a pipe, and in
Oh yeah.
French, underneath the pipe, it says, "This is not a pipe," even though it is, because the image of the pipe is just a representation of the thing. It is not the thing itself. So language is already a barrier no matter how many ways we try and solve it. And that's why communication about identity and putting our brand into the world is extraordinarily hard. So, on that
Yes.
note, let's
Yes.
go back into how you got into this work. So, you found you love focusing on that internal side, just the
Yes.
identity first, and you let other people handle the social media, the artistry, the creative branding.
Yes.
Tell me about why you were so attracted to that space, helping people just define themselves and their name.
There are multiple ways I could answer that.
Sure.
So one of the things that I talk about with my clients is that the self-understanding piece is not a one-time activity. It is
Mm,
an ongoing exploration. And language is not static. Language evolves with us. And so while I think there is a consistency with who we are across time, there is a constant evolution. So
can we pause and say that one more time?
uh that who
While
we are constant
there is a
evolution.
consistency, you said something, there is a consistency with who we
Yes.
are and an evolution over time. Do I have that?
Yes.
Because
Yes.
I totally agree with you.
And language comes with us.
Yeah.
There are things that stay the same, there are things that change. And so the way we talk about something can change over time, even if that thing has been consistent.
Mm,
So even for me, I've had some revelations in the last year around what were the motivations behind me getting into this work. The most surface level one is I've always loved words. I've loved them since I was little. I loved writing little stories when I was a kid. So there's this sense of I engage with the world through words. And I saw the need for that. And I loved hearing about people and their experiences and the illumination that comes with that. Underneath that, I've come to understand that I care very deeply about people being seen for who they are.
mm,
And
yeah.
the loneliness that can come when we are doing something that we're incredibly good at, incredibly high skilled, and it's so hard to get others to see us in that space because it's so internal to us. And we need language to help other people understand who we are and to value us as we are, to
Mhm.
celebrate us. Buying from us for me is like a multiple down the rungs of like value. It's an outcome, but it's not the whole point. And so having clarity through words helps us see ourselves so we're not alone with ourselves. It helps other people see us so we're not alone with other people.
Mm,
And we can go create and make things from that space. I deeply
yeah.
believe that words are action, they are not separate from.
Mm.
Words are part of how reality gets made. And so we have to have the language for things.
Oh, this is just so beautiful. Like, we are meaning-making machines as
Yes,
humans.
we are.
We have to have language to communicate. I mean, that's what distinguishes us from other species and other types of animals is the ability to communicate. And with that comes the gift of inventing language, and new words are added to the dictionary every year.
Yes.
But there's an artistry, right? Like, I don't know if you know Meow Wolf. It's this immersive artistic
I've seen
experience
pictures.
in Denver, and there's a couple locations. And where I'm going with this, it's kind of like an amusement park, but very like surreal. It really tests your idea of what's real and what's not. And one of the founders, I was reading an article he wrote, and he said, you know, if you go to Disney World, like the Harry Potter studio or whatever, you know, this is Butterbeer and this is, you know, Dumbledore. Like everything's been named already, even if they're strange names. But when you go to Meow Wolf, the magic of it is you see people pointing all over the place and go, what's that? What's that? What's that? What's that? Because it's an artistic rendering of unusual things that are bizarre and don't make sense. And there literally is no language. So it tests our ability to be imaginative and create ways to describe these things that don't exist and yet they do exist. And so I think the fact you have that muscle innately in you to feel creative, to feel empowered to use words in ways that aren't maybe normal or it's just it's a creative use of language. I find a lot of people don't have that. They've never accessed that. Have tell me more about your side with that.
Well, I my own thinking around this is getting edited right now because I have a 3-month-old baby
Mm,
who doesn't use language yet, but she does communicate.
mm,
And we play with sounds with her all the time. And so I'm starting to realize that the human body is wired to make these connections
yeah.
around naming and meaning making. So when you talk about meaning making machine, I love this idea of going to Meow Wolf and being like a baby again because she doesn't know
Yeah.
what a tree is. She doesn't know what a
Yeah.
window is. She doesn't know what a nose is. She doesn't even know her own name yet.
Right.
But I'm naming things for her all day long. I'm
Mm,
talking to her. I'm naming the emotions that she's showing me. Um, And so I love that idea of like putting yourself in a space where something is unnamed because you get to have that playful experience. She's just fascinated by
Yeah.
everything. And
It
I'm fascinated with her all over again. Um, I'm like, wow, the world is really weird.
So weird.
She loves the bottom of my kitchen counter. Like, that's like her favorite thing to look at. I'm like, okay, great. Like, I never thought the kitchen counter was fascinating, but to go into a space where we've
Yeah.
intentionally
Mm.
leave room for not knowing
Yeah.
anymore, I
Yeah.
think we're all naturally wired that way. But as Esther Perel would say, like we need adventure and we need stability. And so
Mm.
over time, our brains have like hunkered on to like
Yes.
gripped tight to the meanings that we understand or the names that we're familiar with.
Yes.
Um,
I have a little story on that. I was working with a woman and we were going through these exercises because I help people name their hybrid professional identity, which is who they are at the intersections, which is
yes.
an emergent thing that is literally uncategorized and defies language. And she had been in the career coaching space for a number of years and she was very familiar and she was trying to find her own way and she was saying different words. And they were pretty safe words, very kind of standard. And at one point, we were like, well, what if you are like an idea architect? And she's like, architect, like an architect builds things and houses. Like she had a very narrow definition of what an architect is.
Literal. Yeah. Mhm.
Literal. But the shift that I work with people, and I assume you are as well, is taking words that are ordinary and putting them in a new context. And therefore, it shifts the meaning, but also gives it like a new purpose. To be an idea architect or a head of animation in a studio that's like a museum is a different reuse that gives it a new association. Like you can do that with words.
Metaphors are my favorite thing. I love metaphors. But one of the things that I also think about, so if we go even more internal than the
Mm,
title of idea architect, which I think is really compelling and draws on the multifacetedness,
right.
not multi-hyphenatist, but multifacetedness of like a hybrid professional.
Mhm.
I do see that people connect with words in a very unique to them way.
Yes.
So the thing that I call this is the ground truth.
Okay.
What it is you do, what is the primary verb of your activity that you contribute in the world,
Hmm.
and what is the result of that? And that is what I call the ground truth. And it
Ooh.
is a thing that holds true across time. It is a thing that you can't help but doing in any room that you show up in, especially rooms that see you and value what you're doing.
Mhm.
And in that language, I want it to be words that people immediately understand when they say it to themselves. So the ground truth is not external. It is what is a word that when you say it to yourself, you are connected in with that energy and alignment and contribution.
That is
So
huge. I
it's
agree with
huge.
that completely.
And it what I was thinking about this circle that you kind of described of a picture's worth a thousand words, a video's worth a thousand pictures, blah, blah, blah. And you ended with experience.
Yeah.
But I think the best language is rooted in
Mm.
experience. Like it's
Mm.
that full circle. The experience
Yeah.
takes us back and we craft, maybe not craft words, but we find the
Yeah.
words that connect us back into those physical experiences. So
Well,
I'm
words
realizing as we're talking that like I'm
yeah.
obsessed with words and I'm actually obsessed with embodiment. Like that's actually what I'm
You just hit the nail on the head. I was gonna say this is somatic, this is embodiment, and that might sound strange to people, and I didn't get it at first. I didn't use that for a while when I started this work, but I noticed a couple things. Words have power. If I
yes.
call myself a scientist, I'm like, "That doesn't feel right. I'm not a scientist." Like, there's just a thing you feel, and you have to notice and pay attention to what that does in your body. I wasn't doing that. Also, the way it sounds and comes through your own mouth, not the ears and the mouth of somebody else. You are like, I don't like it just feels different in your mouth. And then
I
when I
tell my clients that if they can't remember the phrase that we identified a week later, if they're struggling to remember it, then it's not the right language yet. We got to go back in and
yes.
tweak.
And when you find the words that are truly you, your ground truth, it literally resonates. You have, and I watch it in people, they have this
You
aha
feel it.
awakening. Yes. It
Mhm.
snaps and they look at me and their eyes go big. I mean, the physical reaction I've noticed is beyond belief, and it
Yes.
happens time and again when people land
Yes.
on it. Yeah.
Oh my yeah, it's so true. And, like, it goes one of 2 directions. It's like, or, like, settled, like, "Oh,
A settling.
oh." There
It's a
is.
completeness because you have finally
Mhm,
helped them articulate their truth.
mhm.
This is who I really am, and I've been trying to describe it in all these different ways and use all these labels that are sort of it, but not really, and they were good enough, but not quite,
Yep.
and they've been holding people back because the power of words is release. It's allowing you to show up as you. Yeah,
Yes,
it's big.
yes.
It's so big. I know we're both kind of speechless, like, now what do we say?
Like, that's the universe right there. Okay. It's such a profound experience, and again, I'm thinking about parenting and kids right now because 'cause I'm new to this world, but one of the things that we know with, like, toddlers or babies, like, once they have some language faculty, if they're upset and you can say, "Oh, I see you don't wanna stop playing. I see you're
Mm,
disappointed." Like, the relief that happens, the disappointment doesn't go away, but
yeah.
there's a relief of having named the experience that they're in,
Mhm.
and just that one moment of, like, not getting the cereal they wanted at the grocery
Yes.
store. So imagine what that's like as an adult when you finally have words for the thing that you do, that is
Yeah.
you,
Yeah.
or is your expression of you in the world.
Mm.
So it's really
It's a
big.
huge deal, and it's not something we've been taught. This is part of figuring ourselves out. This has never
Yeah,
been part of a career development journey. We get thrown assessments and Myers-Briggs and take this DISC thing, and here's your Enneagram number,
which
and
I
those
love those things.
I
I
love
love
those things, thank
them.
you. Like, I'm not bashing them, I'm just talking
Yeah.
about the standard conventional way we do professional development and
Yep.
career development. And what those things do is they provide qualities and characteristics about yourself, but it
Yes.
doesn't help you define what do you call yourself when you are Enneagram number 9 and 4 of these Myers-Briggs letters. Like, those are still kind of boxes
Yeah.
that are details, but not the picture of the name.
And I think we're drawn to them because they are names.
Yeah.
They provide language around something ineffable about our own experience of ourselves in the world, and they
Mhm.
help a lot.
Yeah.
But it's still not quite the same thing as, like, getting the name for you.
Right. So, Dana, one of our watchers is asking, can you repeat and demonstrate the formula for ground truth? She's really interested
Yes.
in what the heck we just described. So let's
Yes.
rewind, but let's
Yes.
help people kind of follow what you do, and I'll kind of add maybe some of what I do, and we'll find how that goes.
Yeah. So the way that I define the ground truth is what you do and the impact that emerges from this primary verb that you have.
Okay.
So the way that I structure the sentence is I blank, I verb so that there's a reaction.
Hmm.
And
Can you
that's
give a personal example of this?
yes, I can.
Okay.
Um and I start with that formula, but most people I've never had anyone have the same sentence.
Okay.
And so the grammar of it can evolve, but we start brainstorming with that. That's
Mm,
actually the second part of our process.
okay.
I'll get back to the first part in a second. So for me, my ground truth, as I am articulating it today, is that I name things. I name things so that we are not alone with our irreducible human experiences.
Hmm.
And that's different than maybe what I would put on my business website, which is that I'm a language strategist. I help
Mhm.
unboxable leaders name their work so they can be seen and known. Similar structure to those sentences. I do
Right.
so that, but there's a language that I use for myself that I understand that the definition for myself it comes in different words. And where that comes from is by looking at my own experiences of when I have felt most alive or most
Mhm.
myself.
Yes.
You can name those experiences differently. Sometimes it's is it congruency? Is it joy? Is it pride? Like everyone
Yeah.
uses a different word. And going through that pile of experiences and naming what's in common between these
Yeah.
things. What is the thread that holds them all together? And can I start to put language to that thread?
So that mimics a lot of my process as well, where it's about finding that joy, those moments of flow. I like how
Yep.
you were like, there's a lot of different names this can go by, but what brings you to that fulfillment and
Yes.
noticing that. and then noticing multiple instances. I do a lot of guided visualization to bring up those memories and to tap into that because I find it's very unconscious. People might have a sense, but there's a lot that are hidden. But when
Again, it's that physical embodiment thing. Like
mm,
when you feel that feeling, what other memories come up for you? What other
mhm,
examples come up for you? And I
yeah,
love to get as like the earliest memory that someone might have of that,
mm.
even if it's a kid memory.
Oh, I love that.
Um, some people don't always have access to those. Like there are a lot of reasons we might not be able to access early memories, but
Mm,
those are often really illuminating because we're not
mhm.
trying to give something to someone else.
That's a good point.
I
Yeah.
love that.
I'm gonna play with that. I like also that you mention, having a few of these memories because you're looking for the patterns or the themes, the consistent thread. Like, what is it about memory A versus B versus C that there's something similar happening here? Can we unearth that? Because I find people will focus on one idea or one memory and be like, "This is when I was my best in my work and I felt this happen, and I'm gonna call
Mhm.
myself this thing now." But it's like, "But wait a second, that was just one point of time. What about these other situations? Does that still stand up?" And we have to compare and contrast. And so that finds that through line of your truth. I completely agree.
The outlier examples are often the most illuminating because you
Yeah.
have to figure out how they fit, and that
Mhm.
forces you to go deeper below the obvious connection points.
And I also love that you're looking at verbs because I have noticed people don't know who they are. So I back into what are you doing when you feel your best?
Yes.
And when do you feel your best? So it's sort of like feelings leads to actions, leads to identities. So that's very similar in my
Mhm.
understanding. And then the piece that I'm curious how this fits with you because I focus on complexity. I focus on people that are multi hyphenate, multi passionate, have multiple professional identities. So they show up and they say, Sarah Beth, I have three verbs that are the most critical, are my truth. So I'm wondering how you handle that to get to the one. When I have
Mhm.
someone with three, that's where I focus on the hybridity. I say, let's draw a Venn diagram and put these three, at that point, there are three identities, one in each circle. And then we have to find the intersectional word. It usually starts with verbs again and memories in order to find the through line of the hybrid identity being formed. So where are you with
Yeah.
that?
So I don't use the Venn diagrams. I tend to just like ignore like, oh, you have 3 professional identities, we're gonna ignore them for the next 3
Awesome.
hours
I love
and then
that.
come back to them later.
Okay.
And usually if we ignore those identities for a minute and we go into the experiences of where that
Mhm.
alignment comes and kind of
Yeah,
like forget the context in which they appear. I'd like to put
yeah.
context aside first
Mhm.
because context informs the branding piece.
Yes.
Like, let's ignore that at first and then we'll come
Yeah.
back to it. And usually that thread emerges and we can see how it's being expressed uniquely and
Mhm.
congruently in these three different
Yes.
channels.
Yeah.
And then if it's a business decision, it's like, which of these is primary? Which of these
Mm.
identities is the one you want to invest in? Or is it keep all three in the air? Like you
Yeah,
want to keep doing all of them. But how are you being expressed in each of these? And
I
then we
love that.
figure kind of that context out. Um,
You and I are
yeah,
so similar. Like, our approaches and methodologies might be a little different, but
yeah,
literally we are parallel
we
because
really
because I do have people identify these 3, I call them your primary professional identities, the ones that are
yes.
so essential to you that if you take a job that makes you diminish or minimize these others, you will feel like less of yourself. So I help people have
Yes.
permission for the multiplicity, but then I literally have them scratch out those words because the words themselves, I think, hold people back. They're like, I've always called myself an educator and a researcher and designer. And I'm like, great, but let go of that language. And I kind of like delete it for a second because we need to unbox, we need to
Yep.
break out. And to break out, you have to allow new words about yourself to come through that you have never used about yourself before. Like,
Yeah.
I call myself a creative disruptor. That completely goes against any title I've ever been given where I'm a program director or an educator or a facilitator. Like, that's the standard language. Creative disruptor is my, in your language, grounded truth. And it comes from these verbs of where I'm challenging and using imagery with data and doing weird things. And I'm like, I don't know what to call that. That's how I work. but that's
Yeah.
the creative disruptor in me that I didn't know was there for all this time. And it's a through line. I can trace
Yeah.
back 10 years of work and say, even in the classroom when I was a teacher, oh my gosh, I was a creative disruptor. Oh, that one time I ran a meeting and people looked at me like I was crazy because I had them role playing. I was a creative disruptor. Like that's what was happening. So,
So
anyway.
I'm very influenced by a Quaker mystic named Parker Palmer.
Oh yeah, Parker Palmer. He's
Yeah,
wonderful.
he's amazing. He wrote a book called Let Your Life Speak,
Mm.
and he talks about looking at stories from when he was a kid and how he like made a little book of like airplane figures, and he thought this meant that he was going to be a pilot when he grew up. And looking back, he's like, no, I've been making books. I've been
Ah,
making books my whole life.
wow.
And so that's actually where a lot of my thinking has come from, of like, how do we go back into these moments and say,
Mm.
what was the real story here? We
Oh,
thought it meant being a pilot or being an artist or
chills.
whatever.
Yes.
And actually it's come to mean X, Y, and Z. And you don't have to control
Mm.
for this.
No.
It just
It's
comes out.
what I'm hearing you do for people is give them a new lens to look back on things. They're like, yeah, I was,
Mhm.
doing this one thing. And then you're like, wait, let's look at that story differently. What were you really doing? Like, I
Mhm.
just really got full body chills when you explained it's the reframe. I've been playing with calling myself something that I do with people as being an identity reframer because I sit
Yeah.
with them and I go, okay, what have you been calling yourself for X number of years? Okay, let's let go of that. Now let's unearth who you really are. And they're like, huh? And it's mental gymnastics because you are shifting their perspective of themselves so drastically. By the time you're done with them, they're like, I started here and I am not the same person. This is the truth that just emerged.
Mhm. I love the word emerge. Like, that's what I think
Mm,
happens for people. It's like, it's not that you weren't this person
no.
or that you didn't have these words. Like, my favorite thing about a ground truth is that it's always in language that I wouldn't use.
Mm,
It's in words that someone else gave me in the course of telling me about their
mm.
experiences. It's their language that
Yes.
comes back to name them.
Yeah.
And it is the reframe. It's the reframe of an emergence of something that's already been there.
Yes. Oh my gosh. Dana, so good. We need to wind this down. What are some challenges? Let's just talk about the top things you
Yeah.
see that people are doing that maybe we can give them a couple tips before we end today.
I see I see a desperation to find the external language a little too quickly.
Oh, yes.
To try to get to the terms that other people that you can put on your LinkedIn profile or your bio. And that's actually usually where people end up coming to me because they're like, I need a bio that feels accurate. I hate writing
Right.
my own bio. I hate writing my
Mhm.
own about page on my website. And those things actually come like at week 4 through 6 in
I was
the
gonna say,
when I take my
how much
yeah.
time do you take to work on this with people? What's just a rough outline?
So my process with people is like it's over the course of 8 weeks with some good
Yeah.
breaks in there for people to
Yeah.
like integrate and think. Um, Another career coach who thinks about this, Carrie Twigg, she talks about like months.
Yeah.
I also see a kind of I call it the brew time. There's something about the
Ooh.
2 year mark after naming your ground truth where
Ooh.
things like really get interesting and spicy. Like it's a
Mm,
two
mm,
2 years. Um, so like these things
yeah,
take time,
it does.
but there's a desperation to get the external piece like figured out now.
Yes. Click
Eh,
today. Yeah, that's what
yes.
they want.
And when you realize that it takes a little bit of time, usually people can adjust to that, but it's kind of the rush to name the title faster that can be a barrier. And I would also say this doesn't happen very often because I have like clear boundaries on who I work with, and that comes up pretty soon. But if you don't have access to your own physical experience of
Mm,
your memories, which again can happen for
yeah,
lots of reasons in our life,
yeah,
that's not something I can help you with.
yeah.
So there's somatic work that can happen, there's therapy that can
Mm.
happen, but that's like another space of
Oh,
work that's related,
yeah.
but not something. And so you have to be able to have access to that to do this.
Just powerful. Like, if I could just put exclamation points all over the screen right now, like, everything you just said, Dana, is spot on to what I've seen with people. They rush this process. They choose words that just sound cool but aren't embodied. They're like, "Oh, I want to call myself a spirit junkie or whatever." And you're like, "What the heck does that mean to you? Is that authentic to
Yes,
yourself?"
it has to mean something to you. It
Yeah,
has to be resonant to you.
yeah.
And if people look at you like you have 3 heads, whatever, but, like, it has to be you have to know exactly what this word means to you.
And that's the integration point too, where if you find the words that are your grounded truth, but you're feeling a little like I'm nervous to use it or anxious, like I can't say that out loud, or people will think I'm crazy. There's a woman I've been working with, and
That
she
happens every time.
every time.
Every client I've ever worked with. We get to a point in the ground truth where I've reminded them 10 times, "This is internal language. No one will ever have to see this. You
Mm,
never have to say these words out loud.
yeah.
We're starting here. You don't have to put this on your website." I like all the
Mm,
caveats.
yeah.
And someone will use a word that they're like, "Oh, but, like, people will think I'm, like, arrogant." And I was like,
Yeah.
"I told you,
Yeah.
no one's gonna
Yeah.
see this." Like, that means there's something scary and vulnerable about that word because everyone
Amazing.
gets there where they're like, "Oh,
Yeah.
no. No, people will
Yeah.
think I'm stupid." I'm like, "No."
I agree that it is a messy space when you're doing this. It's sort of like you're shuffling and digging up all the dust that's been inside of you that's been settling.
Yes.
And that snow globe is like sort of opaque and you can't see your way through. And like that's what you and I do is we sit with people until the snow starts to reset
Mhm.
and fall in a different way and show new sides of yourself and then reflect that back. Like we act as mirrors. This woman, Ashley, that I've been working with, the word kaleidoscope was coming up for her very strongly. And she was dancing around it. Like she would say it. She's like, I'm kind of like a kaleidoscope. And then she would go on these amazing definitions to explain why, but she
Yeah.
didn't want to use the word kaleidoscope. And I kept pointing her back, like, but that's what you keep referring to. Like, what's the tension? And she's like, I just can't call myself that. People will think I'm crazy. And she's been leaning into it and saying, I'm a life and work kaleidoscope or work life kaleidoscope. So kind of adding a caveat before it. And it's settling. She's like, I
Mhm.
feel good in this. Like she's still testing it. She's in that brewing phase. But I think there's something really cool when you push yourself to use words that really don't feel normal, but they're you. And there's just getting over these hurdles, these mental hurdles. So,
Yeah.
wow. Okay. Yeah. Giving yourself more time, sitting with this uncomfortable stage. Was there one other thing you mentioned? The embodiment piece,
Yes, the
being
embodiment piece.
authentic. I think those are some good takeaways of the challenges we notice people hit very commonly to name their unnamed identities, to
Yeah.
unbox themselves. Um, I just, Dana, I love so much what you're doing. Any final thoughts you want to leave people with?
Um, I this is my favorite thing to talk about,
I
so
know.
come
We
talk to me about it.
Thank you, everyone that's watching. We've got an amazing audience here today. The comments have been awesome. The energy, the questions to have us restate the process. So I'm really glad we could help. If people want to reach out to Dana, she is a treasure. And so, how can they find you?
The best place to find me is at my website, which is on the screen. Uh,
Nameyourwork.com.
there you can also get on my newsletter. I'm still kind of on parental leave, but in
Okay.
normal times, I have a weekly letter that goes out called Words Are Action, and I look at language from different lenses and what
Hmm,
it does and how it impacts us both in our work and how we name ourselves, but also how we're looking at the world around us and naming what we're experiencing. So,
amazing. You can follow her on LinkedIn. Obviously, a lot of my work of hybrid professional identity and your work on naming are just so in sync. And I have to say, I haven't seen this anywhere else. Like, this is different than branding. This is
yes.
different than, I don't know, just career coaching. This is literally unlocking who you are. So definitely follow her. And then for people that are interested more about what I do, please come to morethanmytitle.com. It has a lot of freebies and resources about professional identity and hybridity. And I am running my next course in May, which is a small guided cohort where people get to work with me every week. We unlock your professional identity in order to brand your hybrid professional identity. So it's that naming work. And I see that in a small group, there's a lot of group collaboration and reflection to get more of this language forward. Like people use really cool words when we're in a collaboration that you wouldn't have thought of otherwise. So go check that out if you're interested in being in my next course because it's just a phenomenal process and it takes a month. We go through it week by week, a lot of resources. And in the meantime, please say hi to me on LinkedIn, and I hope to see people later. Dana, thank you. It's been a
Thank
huge
you.
pleasure. I feel like we could do another one of these, so I will reach back out. And it's just been a
Perfect.
blast today. Thank you so
And
much.
we need to talk about your book, like, in one of my spaces sometime. Like,
Okay.
it took so like, read it on my Kindle. I have so many highlighted notes.
I love that.
We're so good.
Oh, thank you. It's one of those things when you just, I don't know, it like comes through you. Like I literally don't even know sometimes how I wrote what I wrote, but it's just my observation and lived experience and research. So thank you so much.
Yeah,
Okay,
thank
everyone,
you.
we are going to sign off and please connect with us later. Bye, everybody.
Bye.